40 participants on. I know we'll have several more people joining in. We had about 80 to 90 registrations for this today. So hello and welcome to our first ever virtual procurement talk. We'll be doing many more of these this year. Hopefully we'll be able to have some in-person events in the fall, but we wanted to bring these events to you live and keep the engagement and community together. So we decided Zoom was our best outlet to do that. I am Sarah Scudder, president of Real Sourcing Network, and myself with a team of really innovative, unique sponsors have got together and decided that we wanted to help bring the procurement community together to innovate, collaborate, and make new connections and friends. So again, this is our first procurement talk of the year. We'll be doing 2 a month, probably through August. Hopefully we'll be able to connect in person again in the fall. So with that, before we kick off our rockstar panel and do some sponsor introductions, I've asked Mike from Procurement Foundry to join us. And for those of you who don't know Mike, he's formerly a CPO. He was at the Publicis Group for about 10 years. And he decided to take the leap into entrepreneurship, gosh, I think 3 years ago now, Mike. And he decided to start a consulting practice. And in doing that, he realized that there wasn't a really great place for buy-side individuals to get together to network and collaborate. And so he said, you know what, I'm gonna go on a whim and I'm gonna start an online group for people on the buy side in the procurement space. And he did that through LinkedIn and it kind of blew up. Mike had an idea and it really took off, but LinkedIn wasn't able to handle his volume. So he decided to relaunch his community in Slack. And so now the Procurement Foundry is at about, Mike, what, 2,700 members? Mike, you're muted. You'll have to unmute. So Mike is, Brandon, I think you'll have to unmute.
Unmute now. Hey, how are you? Can you hear me?
There we go.
Fantastic.
So Mike, you're at about 2,700 members right now?
Yeah, we're climbing to 3,000 right now. We're about 2,700 in Procurement Foundry, and we just crossed over the first 100 in Human Capital Foundry. So
wow.
We're really excited.
Congratulations.
Thanks.
So Mike did an interesting survey a couple months ago about compensation in the procurement space. And so I've asked him to present the results and finding for our group today. And he'll be presenting for about 10 minutes. We're going to take about 5 minutes of questions. So go ahead and put your questions in the Q&A. Brandon, with the pretty backdrop at the top, he'll be managing the Q&A and asking the questions to Mike at the end before we transition to the panel. So with Mike, I'll pass it off to you.
Thanks, Sarah. Really appreciate it. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Virtual World. I'll just share my screen and we'll get going on some slides for you from the presentation. So let me just move me out of the way. Can you all see that?
Yes.
Great. So as Sarah said, back in December timeframe, we had about 1,500 members back in December. So from December till now, we've gone from 1,600 to about 2,700. But during that timeframe in December, we had about 1,600, and we wanted to do a salary and compensation survey just to try and get a feel for where everybody was at and try and get some information out to all of our membership. Just so you know, all of our members get this content for free. There's a couple of slides I've cut out of it, but all the good stuff is in here for this presentation. I just wanted to be able to get through my 10 minutes of spiel. So if you join Procurement Foundry, this is downloadable and accessible to you. We had almost 35% of the community, we had almost 500 people fill out the salary and compensation survey, all Procurement Foundry members. So this is really good data. It's actually heavily vetted. You have to be a practitioner to get in, and then you have to be a practitioner to actually fill out the survey. So I'll jump right into it. And we plan on doing this every year, and we plan on doing multiple surveys per year, not just on compensation and salary. I've had some people come back to me and go, hey, thanks a lot. You helped me negotiate a new gig, and you helped me negotiate better benefits. This is both, this survey encompasses both base salary, full compensation, benefits, It's got MBA data in here, certification data in here, and everything. So let's see. I just want to, sorry. So first and foremost, from a high level perspective, like I said, we had about 400 people, 450 people sign up for this and fill this out. 82% were in the United States at the time. Our average salary, full compensation, was about $193,000 across all of our members. That was prorated against. We had a bunch of people in a bunch of different countries, so we did do currency foreign exchange factoring. So this has all been normalized against currencies. And you can see that the average amount of experience was about 15 years. We did years of experience, what their bonus was, what their base salary was, what their total compensation was. And we had about 25 countries on 6 continents. So it was a really, really interesting survey. We didn't have enough information to give global data this year. We have some data in here for the US and Canada, but as I think probably the next one we'll probably be able to do most of Europe, because we'll probably be at 5,000 members, and then we'll have some really significant global data. Again, we had about 73% of men, 27% female. Interesting enough, up in Canada, that it changes drastically, which is really, really interesting. So in Canada, there's almost equilibrium in the community in procurement across men and women, which I thought was really interesting. And the one other thing that I thought was really interesting was the Procurement Foundry itself actually has about 32% female. So for some reason, men are more willing to fill out the survey and talk about their compensation than females, women, sorry. So just an interesting tidbit on that. We did try and find out, okay, where are folks as far as their respondents rate? So where the men were and where the women were. We asked them what level they were at inside of the companies, just so you know. We asked them where they work. This is obviously going to change drastically next year. So where do they work? Do they work from home? Then we talked to them a little bit about their MBAs. So do they have MBAs? Really interesting. Almost 50%, what we found was almost 50% of the industry practitioners that were surveyed, of the 450, have absolutely no MBA or certification at all. Half of the people that responded don't carry any MBA or certification, right, in this first column here. So then we had about 15% of our that only have a designation. We've got about 26% that only have an MBA. And then we had about 10% of the people who carry both. So really interesting that we found that half of the industry doesn't have any MBA or certification at all. Then we had which ones are common, and I'll run through this real quick. So you can take a look at this and see, we put some of the top industries. Really interesting, United Kingdom is heavy in SIPs, as you can imagine. And you can see that Canada also carries a lot of SE. So if you look at outside of the United States, the actual certification, industry certifications are a lot heavier, weight a lot more heavier than just in the United States. Significantly more people in those countries actually carry certifications. We talked a little bit about benefits and compensation. I won't get into this slide too much, but we talk about what's your annual bonus, are you getting education to spend, investment contributions, and we wanted to have this be really, really in depth so that if you're going to negotiate a new job, you can take a look at this and say, hey, listen, at the VP level, 29% of people are getting a matching contribution, right? Or 100% of the people are getting, C-level annual bonuses. 88% of VPs are getting annual bonuses, right? And then also, what about healthcare, dental, life insurance? I personally like to see who's getting parking premiums. That's my, who's getting a parking slot in the office. That's what I like to know. But we have all that right down to, is anybody actually getting low interest mortgages from their company, which I thought was really cool. So yeah, we got really, really deep on this thing. Average bonus per years of experience. So what is the average bonus against total compensation at the different levels? So you can see at the C level, the average annual bonus is about 53%, 24% of their average compensation against 23.5 years of experience. Number of years with their current employer, 3.5 to 4 years. So The C-level executives are rotating in and out, but it gives you some really good levels. So if you're a senior director, your average bonus should be somewhere around 22%. The entire group altogether got about 18%. You can see it gets lower as we go lower, as you would expect. And then this is probably one of the biggest slides, which is the gender compensation gap. So if we look inside of the United States, across all men and all women that answered, there's about a 16% gender gap right now in the United States. So women are making approximately 16% differential on total compensation. On base salary, it's about 13.5%, but on total compensation, ladies, you're getting taken to the woodshed by about 16%. What's interesting is the gap grows as you get from base salary to compensation. So men are actually getting bigger bonuses than ladies. Nothing really shocking there, but at least we have confirmation of that, right? This is really interesting. So we took all that data and then cross-referenced it across regions. So if you look at the middle here in the center aisle here, it shows you the different regions and the different compensation models. So what's really interesting is that if you're in the Pacific, so if you're in Alaska, California, Hawaii, Oregon, Washington, the compensation models are almost on par, right?
Yeah, California, way to represent.
California is almost on par, right? 235,000 for men, 234,000 for women. But the further you go east and the further you go south, the worse it gets. So if you're a female executive inside of procurement right now and you're working out of one of these green states or one of the purple states, you probably want to pack your bags and head a little bit further west and a little bit further north quickly. Because if you look at, for example, in the South, some of these numbers get really big. I mean, $216,000 for men versus $164,000 for women, $188,000 for men, $129,000 for women. The gap gets as large as almost 31%. The South Central portion is the largest gap at 31%. So we calculated all that out for you, and I forgot that the calculation was right there for me to read. So, but you can see it goes from almost flat in the red to 31% in the green. So you know where you want to migrate to. The good news is we broke it out and we said, hey, listen, this is what people are making on average across these different groups in these different regions. So you can see, you know, managers are making a lot more money in the Pacific than they are everywhere else. So you can actually kind of take this data and pinpoint where you want to take your career. Really, really interesting stuff. If you're willing to pack up and move, obviously. Compensation by country, by MBA and gender. So here's one that's really interesting. The pay gap reduces to 5.5% for women in the U.S. with MBAs. So the difference between men and women in the United States who both carry MBAs goes down to 5.5% from 16%, which is amazing. So if you're a woman and you have an MBA, the pay gap goes down. It's not on par yet, but it's getting close. In Canada, the gap was only the aggregated compensation gap between men and women was only 7.5% in total. So thought that was pretty interesting as well. And the U.S. Women without an MBA, the pay gap rises to 20%. So if you're a woman and you're thinking about getting an MBA out there, by all means, you're going to shorten the compensation gap if you get the MBA. Let's see. This talks about Canada and the U.S. and base positions and base salaries. I'm going to skip through that because we don't have a lot of time left. Total compensation in the U.S. and Canada. Again, I told you at the beginning that we had enough data for the U.S. and for Canada, so we published that. We're hoping next year to have, you know, India and Europe and the rest of the countries covered as well. The Canada, so with respect to the total compensation levels at the analyst and associate level, Canada exceeds the U.S. in compensation by about 20 to 65%. This is pretty interesting, actually. So at the lower levels, this has all been aggregated into U.S. dollars, which is pretty interesting. You can see at the lower levels, Canada pays better than the U.S. for associates and business analysts, which is probably because of the certifications that they carry up there, right? But then once you get above associate into team level, the U.S. starts to pay more and goes higher and higher as it goes. So really interesting to us that in Canada, at least, the lower levels of pay, you actually get paid more in Canada than you do in the U.S. in foreign exchange fixed compensation. Big question here. Is the MBA worth it? Obviously, you do get paid more. The MBA practitioners earn more overall compensation base. Middle management with MBAs have very little compensation improvement. Associates and C-levels. So if you're a chief procurement officer or a senior vice president of procurement, you get a bump because of your MBA. And if you get junior associates, you get a bump because you have an MBA. Middle management doesn't see very much value proposition. You can see it's 4.5%, 2%, 8%. But it goes up to 30, 29%, and 60, 70% in the upper levels. So there's a gap there in middle management. If you have your MBA, you don't get a lot more than the folks who don't have MBAs, to be completely candid. So really interesting compensation by gender. So do women and men who have MBAs make more or less depending upon the level that they're at? And you can dive into this. Essentially, what we found out is men without MBAs in most cases make similar, if not more money than other men with MBAs. So there really isn't much of a gap between men who have MBAs and don't. Women without MBAs make considerably less than women that do have MBAs. So the value proposition of an MBA program for women in procurement right now is much more valuable than for men in procurement right now. At least that's what our findings were. Average compensation over years of experience. So you can see it kind of levels out. It goes up as you would expect, and then it planes off. So while they're making more money, there's not really an up and to the right. It kind of planes off depending upon the years of experience. So you get up to 15 years, and then it kind of teeters out. Let's see. Average compensation by position also starts to teeter out once you get to vice president and C-level. And the total compensation, though, goes up. So this is the base compensation stays the same. The bonus structure is where people make a lot of money with higher levels, right? So if you're looking to get big bonuses and you're looking to get total compensation, you got to still claw your way up. Average position by DNA, by MBA designations. So really interesting. Industry designations carry a compensation value of between 11 and 18% in the lower levels. However, on average, across all survey respondents, industry practitioners with no MBA or designations have 7% more compensation than people with sorry, that's probably the most important thing, and I just messed that up. So across all of our survey results, what we found was that people who do not have MBAs or designations actually, on average, aggregate across the 450 people, make about 7% more than people that do have industry certifications and MBAs, which is pretty wild when you think about that comment. Yeah, I think probably, and it's not for me to interpret, but you might want to think about getting an MBA instead of a certification. Job raises. So really interesting. The last one is job changes and raises a viable option? Absolutely no question about it. Springboarding people, you can see. So these are people who have not changed jobs in the last 24 months. They're averaging about 3.5% growth year over year. People who are changing their jobs are averaging 20% growth. So if you're looking to make more money, springboarding versus staying with your current employer is definitely a more viable option. We did look into this and say, did you keep the same position or did you go higher? And this is normalized for people who stayed in the same positions. So literally just moving from one job to another because of the shortage. Now this might change because of what's happening with the current situation, but at least before this, back in December and January timeframe, springboarding and going laterally to the right actually got you approximately a 19% increase on average. So that's it. And then we do some survey takeaways, which is basically everything that I touched on already. But this is all available to our members, and we just do a closing thank you and thank you to all the team that helped us out. So that's about it.
All right, thank you, Mike. Brandon, looks like we have a couple questions come in for Mike.
Yeah, was that a Dunkin' Donuts iced coffee you were rocking there, Mike?
It is, and there isn't any Baileys in it at all. Absolutely not.
How responsible of you.
I try. And you own your own business, you can do whatever you want now, Brandon. I hope none of my clients are watching. What do you got for questions? Anything? Or is that it? That was the question? Is that a Dunkin' Donuts?
So one of them kind of on a general level is just,
Yeah.
what are your, and especially relevant during COVID, what are your immediate concerns with just supply chain and suppliers? like on a broad level?
For me personally,
Just what are you kind of hearing about?
yeah, certainly. So what's interesting is that the Procurement Foundry has both supply chain management people and indirect procurement people. Everybody right now is just focused on medical supplies and trying to help in that space. And also people are understandably, so there's two big things or three big things that I've heard about so far that in the supply chain are really, really difficult. One of them is medical supplies. One of them is the last mile because a lot of truck drivers haven't gotten sick yet. And the other one is people are having trouble finding technology for the migration home. So there was a run on laptops in the first week or two. I think laptops is probably still in demand, although I think the supply chain is starting to pick up with that now. And then the big question is what's happening on ocean freight, and the logistics people are talking about the fact that there may be some downside to the fact that that they haven't been able to get all the containers back into China so they can start moving things across. So air freight's probably picking up quite a bit. I was told today that the Patriots family flew the Patriot planes over to get masks into Massachusetts and just bypassed the supply chain altogether, which I guess is great if you get a couple of 757s and you can fly things in. But the other thing I heard was that there's a lot of concern right now in the marketplace about, we were heavily in a talent shortage from a procurement perspective, and I'm hearing that is quickly flipping on its dime, and that people are just in lockdown on freeze mode as far as new hires and things like that. So there's still a shortage for talent, but there's not a shortage for open recs. So all the open recs have been put on hold. There's a lot of people out there that are looking. I'm seeing more and more people come into Procurement Foundry every day who are actively looking. So that's definitely a concern.
Well, Mike, thank you. And how does someone get a copy of your survey again, one more time, if they didn't hear at the beginning?
Yeah, so if you want a copy of the survey, you can very easily become a Procurement Foundry member. If you're a practitioner, just go to procurementfoundry.com and join. We vet our memberships right now 3 or 4 times a day because of how many people are trying to come in. And once you come into Procurement Foundry, which is our Slack-based community, you'll find it right inside of the water cooler and the announcements board. It's downloadable. You can chew it up. You can ask questions. And we do some analysis of it ourselves inside of the Foundry as well. So you're welcome to come in and be a member and get the content.
All right. Well, Mike, thank you for joining us, and I look forward to having you.
Mike,
we got one more, okay?
What was the main reason of doing this survey?
Good question. The main reason to do it was to help my practitioner membership to make sure that they're getting compensated. And to answer the question of how bad is the female population getting taken to the woodshed? I wanted to know the answers, and I wanted to hear it from the practitioners themselves. I didn't want to hear it from some study that was sponsored by so-and-so and such and such. And I thought, listen, I got 1,600 practitioners. Let's ask them. So definitely the driving factor behind it, and the reason why we started Procurement Foundry was just to help the practitioners, give them a place to aggregate, collaborate, grow, learn. And what better thing to help them learn on than their compensation model so that they can go out and negotiate better jobs.
Yeah. All right, Mike. Well, thank you for joining us. Look forward to having you present again at another Procurement Talk when you do your survey after the craziness and when things get back to the new norm.
Great. Good to see you all. Thank you.
All right. So I want to give a shout out to all of our sponsors who make all the Procurement Talks possible. Again, these are things we do several times a year to engage and bring the community together. So I want to highlight each of them for a second. So Amanda, let's go ahead and start with you. Amanda, if you want to do a quick shout out and introduce yourself and what you're doing at HPP. Do we need to unmute Amanda? All right, Brandon, let's unmute Amanda. Okay, we're gonna start. It looks. Are we good now?
We're good. Thanks, Sarah. So, HPP, and thanks for the introduction. HPP is all about helping your suppliers become better suppliers. And through this crisis, what we've been focused on, we traditionally would help suppliers as part of our business get access to capital that they needed, whether it was for growth or other needs. So we would help them become bank and investor ready. When the crisis hit, we decided to focus on helping small and medium-sized businesses get the disaster loans that they so desperately need right now. So we are helping as many businesses as we can to get that funding, and we are here to help all of the suppliers who are struggling right now who qualify for these disaster loans to give them advice and direction. So thank you, Sarah, for including us as always, and I look forward to hearing the panel conversation today.
And Amanda, you are also the CEO of GWPP, and Mike mentioned a lot about things that are happening in the compensation space between men and women. Can you talk to us a little bit about what's going on at GWPP?
Yeah, so thanks for that too. And while GWPP is not a sponsor, it does cross over in my life, so I need to talk about it. So GWPP is a organization of 4,200 women and men across procurement. It's a LinkedIn group, free membership. And it's interesting because we saw Mike's results, and Mike was gracious enough to give the GWPP organization a discounted access to his study. And so we're taking a very close look at it to help women, basically empower women in procurement to live their best careers. And that's what GWPP is all about.
All right, Amanda, thank you again for being with us, and thanks for sponsoring. And I'm excited to see all the virtual events that GWPP is going to host this year.
One's coming up just next week, so look out for it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, next we've got Carolyn. She's coming to us live from a beautiful farm ranch, as we can see in her background. So Carolyn, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, I am Carolyn Simkowski. I work with CenterTrade. I've been there for about 2 years. I head up their marketing group right now. We are originally a European company, but we now have offices in about 22 locations around the world, and we basically have a end-to-end e-procurement suite software, SaaS.
Well, thank you.
And we are absolutely.
And the farm looks beautiful.
It's getting nice and green this spring.
All right, thank you.
Thanks.
Next, we've got Manish joining us.
Okay, thanks, Brandon. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Manish Center of Managing Director for TechWisen. We are a talent acquisition and statement of work shop. Currently, we are operating in 5 different countries. I'm really glad to be part of the procurement group because I get to learn how procurement is thinking. And I also wanted to ask a question to Mike on the presentation that he did. Why is there a less gender disparity in Canada compared to US, and why there is a huge disparity between US and UK?
All right, Brandon. Yeah.
Sorry. I don't know. I have to be honest with you. I think that probably one of the reasons why there's less gender disparity in Canada is because of, it's going to have something to do with the weight associated with that certification process that they have. If you look at, but that doesn't really hold true for the UK either, right? You would think that with the UK being really, really heavy in certification and Canada being really heavy in certification, if you get a certification, whether you're male or female, that kind of levels out the playing field a little bit. We see that ringing true in Canada, but in the UK, we didn't. And it could just honestly be, at least for our numbers, it could just be that that the UK figures, we just don't have enough of them. I think we had like 30 or 40 people from the UK answer the survey. And I think that we've got now probably 200 or 300 members in the UK. So I think our UK numbers for next year will be much stronger and much more defendable, to be completely candid.
Thanks, Mike.
You're welcome.
All right, thanks, Manish. And we've got Ken joining us from Southern California.
Hey guys, how's everybody doing today? Yeah, we're on the sales side. Brian Dugan and I are on this call. We're from Worldwide Services, and we buy, sell, and maintain telecom equipment, IT telecom, servers, routers, storage, basically from all the different OEMs, Cisco, Dell, HP, Juniper, you name it. But we're here to help on the other side. So if there's anything we can do to help lower your cost, even during this time, there's some immediate returns. So just let me know, or reach out to me, or I'll reach out to you guys.
And Ken, what's the jersey behind you?
That is Mike Bibby's jersey from University of Arizona, from the 1997 championship. Not his actual jersey, but he did sign it for me in the gym. So it was good enough, and I had it framed. So pretty cool.
We've got Jonathan representing a jersey as well. Thank you, Ken, and thank you, Brian, for being with us. And our final sponsor, Rapid Ratings. Eric was not able to join us. He actually has pneumonia and is in bed, but he sends his best and wishing him a speedy recovery. So with that, we are going to transition over to our panel. Sabrina will be taking over the reins here. She's going to be moderating our group of industry leaders talking about one of my favorite subjects, about train wrecks and nightmares and crazy things that have happened in our careers. Sabrina is a native of South Africa. She's a supporter of RSA Rugby. She is a Scotch drinker, and she was once bitten by a tarantula. So Sabrina, if we have time at the end, we want to hear your tarantula story. Sabrina is a dear friend. She's an absolute rock star, a great resource. If you ever need anything procurement related, she's a great go-to. And I describe her as an industry influencer. So with that, Sabrina, we're going to transition it over to you and the panel. Okay.
Okay, hopefully I am unmuted now. So Sarah, I want to say thank you to you and the sponsors for having me moderate this chat today. It's like you, this is a topic that's near and dear to my heart. I love hearing about train wrecks, car crashes, not actual ones, but procurement ones, because this means that I don't have to go through it myself. Hopefully I can learn from the lessons of the folks on the panel today, and hopefully that's what our audience can learn as well. I think that, overall procurement, there's a lot of different factors within the world that we operate in, and so many of these things are beyond our control. So if we can hear from our peers as to how they've handled some tricky situations in the past, so much better to pass on the knowledge. I also want to say thank you to the panel members for being gracious enough to share some of the dicier situations that they've found themselves in today. And I think we are going to kick it off with some lessons learned from COVID. 2 bits of housekeeping though, and Brendan and Sarah, please keep me honest with this. But as far as the questions, if you can put them into the chat, we will take questions for the specific panel speaker right after they tell their experience. And then just a gentle reminder for the panelists today, if you could do a quick introduction to yourself right before you answer the first question, that would be great. And with that, I am going to switch over to the first question for the panel, and we are going to Anna to talk about the lessons that she's learned about COVID so far. And Anna should be unmuted too.
Okay, great. Hopefully everyone can hear me now. It looks like I'm unmuted. Great. Hello, everyone. My name is Anna McGovern, and I have grown up predominantly in the consumer packaged goods industry. I counted in preparation for this, and I think now I'm up to 18 years of procurement experience. But the other part of my 25 plus years career has been in the end-to-end supply chain. I spent a bit of time, 4 years right out of school, working in industrials. And then I moved into consumer packaged goods, where I spent 23 years with Unilever. And then I transitioned into cosmetics and fragrance and beauty. I worked for Arcade Beauty, leading the supply chain and procurement organization. And now I am, I've just launched my own private practice. I'm a consultant and the principal of the Pondview Group. So I'm delighted to be here and look forward to addressing some of the questions that are going to be posed to me. And with regards to COVID, I've been doing a lot of, Zoom calls and connecting with a lot of peers and procurement colleagues. And really the impact that I want to talk about, most of my experience has been on the direct materials side, as well as indirect, but mostly from a supply chain, direct materials, packaging, chemicals, and commodities side. So from the short term, obviously, what's happening in healthcare, and Mike addressed some of those. But really what's happening is that there's this overnight shift to an e-commerce supply chain that no one really anticipated, because even with the whole Amazon effect over the last several years, e-commerce is really still a really small, very, very tiny part, single-digit percentage of the overall supply chain. But then as a result of COVID, this has been like turning on a switch, and suddenly everything is about how do we order from an e-commerce standpoint. The supply chain is not ready to handle that. I think what's happening is that the federal government is dictating the supply chain right now, and there is not a cohesive, unified supply chain strategy from a federal government perspective. You've got 50 states that are competing against one another, and 85-cent, I don't know, the mask, right? So the masks that everybody is looking for, I blanked out on the name, are now being bid up state by state. And then what's more important is that private industry is not able to cope with the demand signal. So you'll get an order, and let's just, for the sake of argument, say it's for 100 million masks or 100 million gowns or ventilators or whatever it is. Well, fine, we can make those, but how do you deploy them, right? And this has been the challenge to the supply chain and to procurements, because we're having to source, but then where do you send that information? Where do you send the stockpile? So that's on the short-term side. There's really a need for predictive analytics, right? And a lot of supply bases, a lot of supply chains are not geared up for that, right? So there isn't that predictive analytics AI component that's associated with demand and supply at this stage. I think in the long term, for procurement, the implication is that the supply chain is going to go through a step change. If you think about the strategy over the last 10, 15 years, it's been a lot of single sourcing. So, invest once and deploy everywhere. So CapEx in a big, power center factory, let's say. And now I think we're going to get back to the model of the early 90s, where you've got multiple sources, multiple regional sources. And I think suppliers need to cope with that change in strategy, and where do they invest in relationship to their partners, their customers. I think the other thing is, I think we're ready for a full-on e-commerce supply chain. So basically, how do you put together a tube of toothpaste with a bottle of shampoo and a box of, doggy treats in the same box? And how do you predict that kind of a supply chain? And therefore, what are suppliers' demand signals going to be relating to that? And then really the other thing that I think is going to be a major, probably medium-term impact, is that the rise of third-party manufacturers and co-packers is going to be significantly on the rise, because this is transformational and it's unprecedented. So before companies and manufacturers start to invest capital in their own supply chain, I think they're going to take a wait and see approach, and they'll probably co-pack a lot of items waiting for what is the long-term demand signal going to be. And so therefore, I think investing in a third-party manufacturer right now would be a good idea. Maybe we can pool our resources and do that. So I think those are, the key takeaways that I've taken based on everything that I've studied over the last several weeks and a couple of months, and based on the recent conversations I'm having with peers and clients.
Yeah, that's great insight, Anna. I think, I think you're spot on, and I think there's going to be an assessment of just-in-time supply chains and manufacturing. Just there's either we're going to go back in time, or we're going to end up with hybrid models all over the place. But I think as procurement, we're going to have to take a look at all the different scenarios, all the different models, and figure it out.
Yeah, I think supply chain just in time is going to be dead. We need to start investing in resiliency and contingency for sure. So.
Yep. So keeping along with the COVID discussion for a minute, we're going to speak with Tandra about her experience and maybe some changes that she would make to her contracts in light of what she knows now. So great, she's unmuted. Hi, Tandra.
Thanks, Sabrina. How are you? My name is Tandra Davis. Welcome to everyone to this fabulous procurement talk today. My background is in procurement. I've worked for a number of industries, anywhere, but currently I'm working for NYU in a global procurement leadership role. And prior to that, I've worked for Ipsos, which is a market research firm, Cushman & Wakefield, GE. And in addition to that, not only do I have a procurement background, but I also have a finance background. So have a complement of both. And NYU, I guess, in preparation for this COVID-19 has had to react drastically because we had students that we needed to remove from the dorm lifestyle, so to speak, and kind of just react at a moment in time. And so it was March 16th when we were all told that we were going to start working from home. Students were about to go on spring break the following week, and then a reading break the next week. In an instant of a decision, it was decided that we would clear out the dorms. So we had to do that immediately. And on a Sunday, I'm getting calls about how do we get students packed up in 2 days and out of the dorms because of, I think it was mostly related to the state and trying to get students transitioned out and the dorms prepared in case of the COVID emergency in terms of having spots for beds and additional residents for any healthcare professionals that might need it. So calling all types of vendors, trying to get boxes, trying to get movers, trying to get people ready, and literally like a 24-hour space. Took a lot of effort, but we were able to engage our current suppliers that we had relationships with. So thank God we had those relationships developed that we can call and have all this type of work transpired in a matter of 2 days. And in a matter of that end of that week, all the students were either packed up or moved out. Additionally, we've been looking for PPE equipment for our student health center. Our dental school now is closed. We've also been donating whatever we had to NYU Langone. So it's just been ongoing. And also from a transitional standpoint, also looking from a financial standpoint at the institution, at NYU per se, having to give refunds back to the students for their for a portion of their dorm stay that they're not using for the rest of the semester, looking at all the financial obligations of trying to get students who are on global programs, et cetera, out in Abu Dhabi or Shanghai, trying to get them back into the United States so that we could all be compliant. So it's just been a roller coaster of a ride over the last 4 weeks, and it continues to be that type of ride and transition as we continue into this type of pandemic crisis that we're having.
Yeah, hats off to you for being able to pull all that off. So many times I think it's actually procurement who picks up a little bit of the slack and does the extra pinch hitting, not just the pure procurement traditional role, but helping, with the logistics, with the donations, with everything else that needs to happen. So hats off to you, Tandra, for taking care of that.
Yeah, and additionally, Sabrina, now a couple other things that we're looking at is how to unravel out of a lot of these events out of graduation, where we have procured space which we're not going to be able to utilize this year. So trying to work through force majeure and possibility clauses with these vendors, and trying to get, trying to see what reimbursements that we can get back based on those as well.
Yeah, and I think it's difficult right now for finance and procurement because there's that balance between how much do we need to get back and how do we still remain, part of the overall ecosystem and not put more people out of work. So heart-wrenching things to figure out.
Absolutely.
All right, so I'm gonna try to turn COVID on a little bit of a more positive note here, if that's at all possible. And we're going to talk with Jonathan now about how COVID's managed to put a little bit of momentum and positive momentum into your procurement initiatives. So Jonathan, can you talk to us about that, please?
And Jonathan, tell us about the jersey too.
Yeah, so I'll try to cover all the bases here. So just a little bit about me. I'm Jonathan Townsley. I live in the St. Louis area because that's my hometown, but I've lived all over really the country and the world. I've had quite the background so far in procurement, starting in logistics, sourcing, working with industrial companies like Ingersoll Rand and Eaton, and then moving into more indirect procurement roles with startups and now doing some consulting with the likes of MasterCard in the fintech area. But I'm sitting here in my home office at the moment, and I've got some sports memorabilia. So behind me in the word Cardinals, I'm a big St. Louis Cardinals baseball fan, as you might imagine, being from St. Louis. But interestingly enough, the jersey that you see is my wife's. She played volleyball for the Louisville Cardinals, and she was actually a professional volleyball player in Russia. She was recruited to come over to America and play at Louisville, but in her first match, she tore her ACL. She, after that, tore it 4 more times. So they decided to really just retire her jersey for all the positive momentum and really uplifting kind of spirit she gave to the team.
Yeah, ACL injuries are no fun, but I'm glad you got a jersey out of it. It's a great piece in the office.
Yeah. She looks back at that time as one that she can learn from, and it sort of relates to the question that the attendees gave, in that how am I seeing this whole COVID experience as something positive, and how is it helping me drive my initiatives forward? Well, I can tell you it's really helped to increase my communication skills. Yeah, I was used to having a fairly common communication cadences with my teams and colleagues, but now it seems like I'm in touch more so than ever before. I'm more connected, and I'm really learning from a lot of my colleagues and people that I'm networked with, such as like the Procurement Foundry that we've talked about, and we've had the introduction from Mike on. But I think really that's the biggest positive thing, is it's helped me to communicate better and more often with the people that I think can help, and that I can help them. So it's been, from that perspective, an overall positive experience.
Have you been touching base with your team on like a more regular cadence? I know some people have started up with daily touch bases just for 10 or 15 minutes to make sure that teams are engaged and people are getting the communication time that they need.
Yeah, well, as for me, I'm more of an independent worker, but I do have many stakeholders that I serve, and that's one of the things I actually enjoy about being independent, is I can actually serve those people that I work with. So I am often reaching out to those people just to check in, because I know that this is a very stressful time. So I just want to make sure that they're okay personally. So yes, definitely more touch points, more checking in, just to make sure people are okay.
Great, that's good to hear. Brandon, I don't see any questions so far. Am I not seeing things, or
I've
should
got
we just
some
keep rolling?
submitted from the initial registration. So I'll pass this one off to Jonathan since he was talking about staying connected with other people. But one of the questions was, will this crisis lead to some changes in SRM? And I really liked it because they want to know, how is this going to affect relationships with suppliers? So Jonathan, if you'd like to expand on that.
Yeah, I actually think this will help to strengthen our relationship with our most trusted suppliers. I think the ones, and I'll make the personal distinction. Yeah, I often hear the term vendor, and I really don't like that term. To me, a vendor is somebody that sells me something once, like maybe a hot dog at a baseball game. So I like the term supplier because that signifies something longer term, more invested, more committed, more collaborative. So I think that it will help to only strengthen those relationships. And I know that, especially when you're working with the smaller suppliers, they've often been very supportive of company efforts, procurement efforts. So I think we in turn have to now support them more than ever. So I really think that this will help to only strengthen our relationships that we have with our key suppliers.
Great. All right, so I'm going to take us away from COVID now and just go back to our normal day-to-day crisis that we normally deal with. So Nedi, I was hoping that you could share with us a story about an unexpected failure that you experienced, which had some high stakes around it. And let's unmute Nedi, please. Thank you.
All right, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Excellent. All right, this is Nedi Telvi. I head the procurement function at Compass. Those of you who don't know Compass, and I wouldn't be surprised if you don't, we're actually a fintech startup in the real estate industry. At the same time, we're really a brokerage firm, just like the likes of anybody else that you hear that you buy and sell and go to buy and sell a house or rent a space. But we start specifically building, hopefully if we're successful, the software platform that we hope all real estate industry would run on once we can go live with it. So we're in the process of actually, we have a pretty large technology team and a product team that's actually working on that. But in the meantime, obviously, we have to make money in some shape or form. So we're largely dependent on all our brokers, and actually we're all the way up to 15,000 brokers nationally, New York and San Francisco being the two top markets.
Yay, San Francisco.
We're very big in San Francisco. I'm sure you run into Compass signs everywhere, Sarah.
Yes.
So that's kind of the story at Compass. My background is mostly in procurement, although before procurement, I had a small stint for a few years in investment banking with Morgan Stanley. I consider that sort of my previous life. Spent the last 25 years or so in procurement, probably split between the first half of my career in consulting, doing consulting globally, managing clients, both Asia, Europe, as well as, of course, in the US. And the latter part of that, I did some consulting also in the public sector. Actually worked for Governor Warner when he was in Virginia back in 2003. Doing some literally budget-related work for our governors. And then the second half of my career is all as a practitioner. Joined Ameriprise Financial. I was there about 8 years. Then also Time Inc., where I was there for about 4, and then finally now at Compass. But all three of them had the same thing in common, which is really they were all brand new build-outs of procurement functions. The first two were spin-offs. Because of spin-off, they had no shared services. And now, obviously, with Compass as a startup, we are not a small startup, but as a startup, still lacked a procurement function, and hence I joined about a little over a year ago to build our function, which is very, very small, actually, in many ways. But we're learning how to do more with less, is the way I would really characterize that. So to go back to, before I get to the story, I'll make one comment about the supplier relationship question that came up earlier. I'm sure most people will agree with this. What's also happening now is what was in some cases even strong relationships. I'm finding out a lot of personal details about some of my suppliers and what their husbands and wives and brothers do, because they're sharing stories from their personal lives. So it's getting very interesting from that perspective. The connections are much stronger, not just at a business level, but I'm sure everybody's experiencing the same thing. Everybody likes to talk about, obviously, what's going on in their life, given what's going on around us. So pivoting from that, though, the first experience of build that I had with Ameriprise, it was very interesting because as a spinoff from American Express at the time, Ameriprise was the old American Express Financial Advisors. We had about a year. I joined the company really to manage that relationship, that third-party relationship. That was kind of I was a CPO, but that was my role. About a year into it, American Express was failing pretty much on all the metrics. American Express did not really provide procurement services to anybody. We were the only and first and only customer that they ever had. So they were not experienced to be able to service somebody that was outside of their corporate circle. So it was pretty much a disaster for about a year. All the metrics were down. Our internal employees at Ameriprise were complaining every single day. So we made a decision collectively with American Express. They were anxious to get out of that relationship. They gave us notice and said, we'd like to no longer serve you, and you've got 12 months to figure out what you want to do. So the first, unfortunately, 8 months of that 12 months, we spun our wheels trying to figure out, what do we do? Do we go to another third party to outsource still? Do we build this ourselves? Or do we find some other creative solution? Do we go back to American Express and beg them to stay with us and see what happens? But at the end of the day, it literally took us 8 months just to go through the exercise of evaluating the marketplace, and we were not happy with any of the third-party providers. And this is obviously a different landscape. This is back in 2006. Once we went through that analysis, I remember there was one night evening in a hotel lobby where we're having a conversation between my boss at the time, who was one of the EVPs, executives in the company, and the only team member I had at the time, which is because all we were doing was manage the Amex relationship. We were talking about what we should do, what's the final decision, and we took a vote, and my boss said we should find a third party to do this. We've looked at a few, IBM, et cetera, et cetera. We should get one of those. The only person who was on my team, he said, yeah, definitely we should have a third party do this. And then he looked at me and said, what would you like to do? And I said, we are definitely insourcing this. And he said, you're out of your mind. And I said, probably I am, but that's what we're doing. So the next 4 months, which now a 12-month timeline got shortened to 4 months. That was part of being crazy, that I had 4 months to literally build a team, technology, to actually process, policy, everything associated with just literally being to go live. And 4 months later, that was really the drop date. American Express was not going to provide any services, including processing our invoices. By the way, I owned accounts payable, T&E, and all the other ancillary functions as well. So I think we did an unbelievable job. We had to put Ariba in place from scratch. We did an unbelievable job being ready. We did all the communications. We thought everything was set. And day one comes, everything is okay in the first few minutes, only the first few minutes. Then day one and day two, and when we look through the first week, we had invoice volumes coming in at 3, 4, 5, 6x the usual patterns that we'd seen in any week prior to that while we've been with Amex. And we started scratching our heads, what on earth is going on here? What turns out is we did such a good job in communicating. All our suppliers knew that we were transitioning. They held off to all the invoices they had, and they were not sending them to American Express. So we ended up with all the invoices piled up probably for about a month, 2 months, pent up demand on the first week. And the next call I got was from our CFO, who basically said, whose idea was it that we really needed to transition this back to Ameriprise? And I obviously said that was my idea. And then he said, well, your brilliant idea essentially ended up in a situation where all our suppliers are calling DNB and they're telling us we're not able to make payments. We're late on our payments and our DNB rating is going down. So I need you, by the way, our AP team was in India. So he said, I need you to get on a plane, go to India, and I don't want you back in the US until this problem is solved. So essentially I got on a plane and went to India, and obviously the good news story is eventually we got back to stable environment and I got to keep my job, thankfully. But the learning obviously was, one is don't spend 8 months. I'm sure this is obvious. Don't spend 8 months trying to figure out what the right solution is and leave yourself 4 months to implement something. And two, if you're going to take a risk, maybe not take as high a risk as I did. But also, most importantly, we thought we had all the contingency plans, everything. If you have a plan A and a B, certainly have a C. But what also you could do, which we couldn't do here because of that 4 months left, is we couldn't do any kind of a phased rollout or anything like that, because 4 months while we were building just didn't allow us to phase this out. We literally had 1 day to go live, the day that we left the relationship. So a lot of learnings there, but it was certainly, even though it was somewhat a failure, it's the one thing I look back as probably the most successful output that I've actually been able to do in my career.
So let's just say hypothetically that you found yourself in the same scenario, you inherited it from somebody else and you only had 4 months to go live. Would you do it again, Nedi?
Every time I think bad about that particular situation, at that point, at that spot, in that point in time, absolutely yes. I'm not really sure I'm young enough now anymore to take that kind of risk. So now I'm probably going with, let's outsource this. It's easier. How much money do I have to do this?
Yeah. Interesting. It is amazing how much risk one is willing to take on when they're young.
That's right.
So I'm going to keep with the theme of suppliers right now. And this is actually a story that from Sanjay that I really want to hear, because he's got a supplier that keeps popping up everywhere he goes, and I want to hear the story of the supplier.
Great. Hi, my name is Sanjay Setty. I'm holed up here in Manhattan, and in a 2-bedroom apartment with 2 toddlers. That's why I look like I'm lounging on a bed here, holed up and sheltered in. A little bit about my background. I was happy to see Mike's survey about the procurement compensation, and an MBA having some value beyond taking fascinating trips during my 2-year MBA. But post MBA, I worked in management consulting for roughly 5 years, and my claim to fame is having the opportunity to share an office with Nedi Telvi for a portion of that time. We were both doing government consulting. So it's great to see Nedi on this panel as well. And post-consulting, I've been in the food and beverage industry the last 15 or so years. First 10 at big company, Cadbury, Kraft, Mondelez, and then the last 6 years now at Kind for roughly 5 years. And I've been with a direct-to-consumer freshly prepared meal company called Freshly in our e-commerce direct-to-consumer business right now. And I head up at Freshly the procurement and supply chain function. So the story that I have, when I went into Kind, I inherited a distributor. I won't share what the product line is for the sake of the distributor, is that was managing a commodities or areas that in highly competitive marketplaces, and using my consulting mindset or background and looking at an assessment of, hey, where were you going to focus our RFPs or waves of sourcing? We looked at this we're a big enough company to, hey, the hypothesis is we're big enough to go direct now and having the resources to do that. So we did wave after wave of RFP, professionally done RFPs, however many steps you want to say, the 5-step, 7-step sourcing process. The incumbent distributor had a chance at the end of each one to best and final offer and all. They ended up losing one after another RFP. And we quickly found out after RFP number 1 that, they're 25, 30, 50%, depending on the product line, more expensive than going direct at the volumes that we had. it got to a point where they had already lost their, and they're like, you know what movie is coming your way? There's another RFP coming up. Instead of acting professionally, in my estimation, this company ended up going over my head as the head of procurement, going to higher ups in my company, threatening legal action, saying that we're being unethical and unfair. I have lots of lesson learned and scars in my career. One thing I know, when you have someone who's angry and contentious, make sure that, especially make sure you're documenting all your conversations. This company ended up eventually filing a low dollar lawsuit against us, and it ended up getting thrown. It had no merit. It ended up going nowhere. So it was fascinating that this is how this organization engaged with us. And then lo and behold, I moved from Kind over to Freshly roughly just about a year ago. And then when I come into Freshly, this same distributor happens to have quite a bit of the spend in these similar commodities as.
I've been overjoyed to see you're changing in companies.
I'm sure there's a dartboard in that company with my face and darts being sent at it. With the amount of margin and what the difference versus the market, they made a lot of money off of Kind. And to be fair, this company provided a good service when these companies were very, very small and didn't have the resources. This distributor did a good job. So to be fair to them. But when companies, from my perspective, get to a certain scale, it's many of you probably shared the experience, you could go direct. And so what's the lesson learned coming here? And again, so someone on my team who manages this vendor in particular, make sure that they're included in every RFP. They get the best and final chance in the ones that they're the incumbent on, and include them in anything that they potentially might have a shot to that's in their product portfolio. Invite them and be inclusive and document everything. Given the pain and agony I went through at Kind with the interaction with that company, as they have not filed a lawsuit yet at us at Freshly. Fortunately, there are different people in this company who are engaging with us, but just very painful and disappointing that that's how a company would behave if you're giving people, in my estimation, and of course there are two parts to every story. From our side, giving multiple opportunities to come in, present your best and final offer, and reacting in such a way. So the lesson learned really here for Freshly, just keep being very open, invite them to a lot of things. They're being included. And so that's my, from my perspective, the interesting story that I've had two companies in a row, a distributor that has been provided a very good opportunity to show significant value in, by RFPing portions of their business.
Yeah, and I think, to your point, there's definitely two sides to every story, because I'm learning that distributor believes that price gouging is ethical, but RFPs are not. So, always different perspectives to reflect upon and to work with within the supplier community. So thank you. I actually was thinking about that one for part of the day today, what you were going to say. But it does kind of prove that, I think they say about family, you can choose your friends, but you can't choose your family. And I think the same thing applies with suppliers. You can choose the company, but you can't choose your account executive or the people that you're working with on a day-to-day basis. So we're going to have Jonathan now talk about an interesting business trip that he got to take while he was working with one of his suppliers. So Jonathan, I'll turn it to you now.
Yeah, this quick story goes back when reverse auctions were quite common. You think back to maybe 2005, 2004, back in the Ingersoll Rand days when I worked with them. I think we were running one every week. So we had one for our plastics commodity, and it was like sitting and watching the Super Bowl. People were jumping up out of their chairs. They were jumping up, screaming, high-fiving. It was really exciting. And we got a really nice outcome from one of the suppliers that was actually an incumbent. So we thought that everything would go pretty smoothly. They actually invited us to come up to their headquarters in Minnesota, and we had a whole team of people, including our engineering leaders, some of our production leaders. Really wanted to have an all-inclusive process so that everybody could have some face time with that supplier. So we were excited about it. We boarded the plane. We got up to their offices, started the meeting, and the supplier immediately started saying, "Hey, we were very happy to participate in your reverse auction, but we actually don't have any intention of honoring our low bid." We were quite shocked by that. And we asked, "Well, what do you mean? Is this a joke? I mean, it wasn't April Fool's." And they said, "Well, we just wanted to get your attention and get you up here since we just haven't really talked to you in a while, and we want to actually give you a price increase." So we were just completely flabbergasted, and we just decided right then and there that we were going to end the meeting. We walked out and we went home. And 6 months later, we were no longer doing business with that supplier. So, really, we learned from that we have to really dig into some of these initial responses, even though they look glamorous and look great, and the results seem like they would have been immediate. We really should have spent more time digging into, why the supplier was willing to go down so low when they hadn't before. So it just really, I think, drove the lesson home that we just need to be more prepared, do more research, and ask the due diligence type of questions that every procurement organization should. So it was an interesting experience for sure.
Yeah, I didn't realize that suppliers would be unfamiliar with the concept of a reverse auction. And I hope that you guys flew business class and then build it back to that supplier. That would be like the right thing to do.
No, we hurt them more by taking the business away. I think at that time we were about 30 or 40% of their business. So they struggled mightily after that.
Yeah, they just completely eroded the trust with one very thoughtless set of decision making. So yeah. Well, we've talked about suppliers leaving you high and dry. We've talked about price gouging suppliers. We've talked about unclear on the concept suppliers. And now we're going to talk with Anna, and hopefully she's going to give us a slightly more positive spin on a supplier that she's worked with for innovation.
Real quick question for Jonathan.
Yep.
So for suppliers not like those, the ones, how do we help them out in a crisis like this? We've talked a little bit about the relationship, but how about actual business decisions? What can we be doing to help our suppliers now on a business level?
Yeah, I think there's a real simple way to do it. Oftentimes we overlook those simple ways, but I'd just like to ask the suppliers, what can I do for you? Normally it's the other way around. We're really consistently asking them, what can they do for us? But I just like to turn the tables a little bit and ask what I can do for them. And then I just listen and see if I can help them. I don't know if they might be looking for some investment, and that may be reasonable or even doable, depending on the types of services or a company that they are. But sometimes it just takes asking the question, what can we do for you?
Yeah, I think Jonathan's spot on. Just in light of COVID, the two things that I've been hearing from suppliers are payment terms and ensuring that we actually pay when we're going to say, or when we say we're going to pay.
Mm-hmm.
I think cash flow is pretty essential right now, especially for small suppliers. So that's one other thing that we can probably do in the time of crisis. Hopefully that helps a little bit. but you know, some suppliers are suppliers and some are partners. And I think we definitely have to make sure that we look after our partners because they look after us when we need extra help or when we're looking for things like innovation. So I'm going to turn it over to Anna to talk once again about her suppliers, partners.
Great. I think I'm unmuted. Very good. So, you know, I love that Jonathan said he doesn't like the word vendors. I mean, I'll take it even a step further, Jonathan, and I don't even like the word suppliers. I like partners, right? So, you know, vendors you transact with, and suppliers you start to build relationships with, and then partners you create marriages with, right? And I've been very blessed to have been an integral part of Unilever's Partner to Win program. Many of you probably have heard of that program. I think, you know, it put procurement on the board. And in fact, that was the key enabler to Unilever's rankings within the Gartner top supply chains, is because of the Partner to Win program enabled through procurement. So, you know, the last 6 years of my tenure at Unilever, I was leading category procurement operations for the personal care business globally. And, you know, that was a significantly large business. It's, you know, well over 20 billion euros worth of revenue. And, you know, the idea of partnerships, this isn't, you know, procurement is not a driver of the bottom line. And I think that's the key shift that's happening nowadays, right? Because procurement is about driving the top line. It's a value creation center as opposed to just a cost-cutting function. The key, though, the absolute unlock is making sure the business owners are completely and wholeheartedly engaged. So it used to be that, you know, the supply chain is, or procurement rather, is up to the supply chain to sort out. The business leaders don't necessarily have to worry about it. And really, this is about full end-to-end business engagement, top-to-top relationships between customers and suppliers. And it's about sitting down and jointly putting together strategic plans. How are we going to grow together? And then, Jonathan, you were just talking about, what do I need to do to help my suppliers? So investing absolutely is a part of it. So I can remember being a rigid packaging buyer back in the middle 2000s when Katrina hit. And, you know, I'm thinking to myself, I was on vacation, right? And I'm watching the news, and I said, oh my goodness, when I realized where everything had hit, I buy bottles and caps, right? But then I'm like thinking, goodness gracious, you know, the petrochemical supply chain just went down. What does that mean, you know, to me? And it was about bringing in our top suppliers and explaining to them that supply chain continuity was absolutely the key. So what did we need to do to help them buy resin? Did we need to front them loans? Did we need to pay up front? Did we need to pay COD? So it really is about sharing in the pain when there's pain, and it's about sharing in the joy, you know, which is about how do we get together? How do we learn from each other? You know, to take for an example, you know, large companies like Dow or BASF, you know, large chemical producers who service so many different industries. So it's about how do you learn from parallel industries? How do you, you know, apply those kinds of learnings to your own space, you know, by partnering with them? How do you get your joint scientists to go visit each other? You know, so, you know, what's your test method? What's my test method? So in the olden days, it used to be, I need this, you know, here's my R&D spec, and I need you to give me something that'll do this. So, all right, well, here's my catalog. Let me send you this. Okay, I tested it. I sampled it. It didn't work. What else have you got? Think about how much time is left on the table in terms of speed to market. But now, if you've got these marriages, these tight partnerships, where you can have that complete and ultimate trust between partner and customer, right? It's partner to partner, really. And what you're doing is, you know, my scientists are going to your factory and they're going to your lab, looking at your test methods. You're in turn sending your scientists to me, right? And we are learning each other's test methods, and we are co-creating, co-inventing on the spot. So that's the beauty, and that's the unlock to real, you know, innovation, to real creativity, and it doesn't have to be created here. That's how procurement can enable, and they're now sitting at the table, right? So procurement now has a seat at the table, and think about post-COVID, all right? We're no longer the bridesmaids, folks. We are the bride, okay? We are the bride, and I mean, once this nightmare is over, think of the opportunities that are going to come out for the procurement function, because we are the link, okay, to connecting all of the pieces of the end-to-end supply chain. You know, we are the brokers, creating that, tier 1 link, tier 2 link, tier 3 link, back to the business owners. And I think the business owners are now starting to realize that, that link to growth, not just cost cutting.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree with you more. I do think that it takes a particular kind of procurement leader to be able to pull the partners together, to pull suppliers into a situation where they understand why they're collaborating, and to, be forward-looking enough to figure out how to, come up with the solutions with the finance team. And that is the strategic procurement leader, rather than, just making sure POs get processed in time. So,
and not only that, okay, but the procurement leader is not only a procurement leader and a supply chain leader. They are a marketeer, they are a cheerleader, they're an executive coach, basically
mediator as well.
A mediator, absolutely, because so many hours of my time was spent coaching suppliers, explaining to them, look, your audience are a bunch of business leaders. So you need to make sure that whoever is delivering your value proposition is somebody who's going to be able to speak the language of a business leader. Don't give me somebody who's going to give me a bunch of, chemical speak or technical speak. It's got to be someone who can speak the same language as, a senior level business leader and be able to understand it. So coaching, writing their slides, writing their PowerPoint decks, convincing, honestly, it took a lot of convincing, not so much of the suppliers, but the internal stakeholders about the value proposition to start with. We thought 80% of the effort was going to go into influencing suppliers to come on board, right? But it turned out to be the other way around. It was really, how do you strategically influence internally to say, hey, there's something here for you to really drive. And this is why it's of value to you to meet with suppliers. Took a lot of convincing, but it turned around. I mean, and now it's a well-oiled machine. There's a real set governance about how to do that kind of thing. And honestly, that much of the industry across, different parts of, the categories, across different categories, are still a long way off, because there's still that distrust. It's still, one-on-one relationships are, taking off, but multi-party relationships are still a long way off. So how do I co-create across an ecosystem? And how do I create enough trust across an ecosystem? I think I would love to hear if somebody has figured that out, because I think that is going to be the true unlock to step-changing innovation. Is getting people to trust each other in a group and an ecosystem of suppliers rather than one-on-one relationships.
Well, the one upside about COVID is that I think it has the potential to inspire people to actually think about how to build that ecosystem and maybe give a little bit more trust than they would have in the past. I do worry because as soon as you start talking about ecosystems, you get attorneys in the mix talking about intellectual property, and then the whole thing goes out the window. So,
and that's always been the issue, right?
Yeah.
So the business people do it, and then the attorneys put the brakes on everything. So
yeah, so maybe we'll work with our legal colleagues and see if they can kind of look at this through a different perspective than they usually do. But
absolutely.
thank you for that, Anna. That was great. And you bring up a great point, which is that procurement spends a lot of time managing internally as much as they do externally with suppliers. And I can say in the jobs that I've had over the last 10 years, I've spent at least 3 times as much time negotiating internally as I have had with suppliers.
No question.
Suppliers are generally pretty good to work with. So Sanjay, I'm going to hand it over to you right now. I think you had an experience with one of your internal stakeholders who just had spectacular forecasting capability.
So perfect, Sabrina, thanks. A good segue in terms of how do you manage internal stakeholders, and with forecasting, how do you avoid or mitigate selective amnesia? Mark, again, my examples, I'd say from both at Kind and Freshly, how I've learned is we buy natural ingredients with shelf lives. There's a forecast, and hey, marketing can have a great forecast. When you're buying natural ingredients, you have certain crop cycles and windows where you can go buy things. And part of my coaching and guidance to whether it's the head of finance or other functions, is you can't just walk down the street to the supermarket or bodega if you're in New York City and go get, in our case, it was at Kind, it was mangoes. At Freshly, it's cauliflower. You just can't go buy 100,000 pounds of this the next day. So I think without being snarky, it's talking about crop cycles, buying windows in the case of this, and then what are the trade-offs of if you don't forecast correctly, either up or down. These are the trade-offs, and then let's work together. Let's agree what the data, the forecast is, what that volume is, and how far out we're going to buy. That's what I've done at both of my places. I can't say it's worked perfectly because a forecast is never 100% accurate, as I think we all know. But how do you best mitigate the risk in there? And it's literally having a internal sign-off, typically between finance, the commercial, the marketing, sales function, and procurement. In the case of I'm giving examples of crop-based ingredients, is, hey, we're going out there, we're all in this together, and don't point the finger at Sanjay or his team that, hey, we fell asleep at the wheel and all of a sudden we're sitting on 100,000 pounds of mangoes, which literally happened because the SKU didn't sell well. I didn't just go out there and buy that. We agreed to a forecast. And so when you have that, it's more difficult to be challenged on that when you have facts and data to support it. We all agreed at a certain time to go about that. And that's, we're replicating that type of forum at Freshly as we're earlier in our growth stage and maturity stage than Kind, and having that type of, it's finance, the commercial function, and procurement for the crop-based ingredients. It's a 3-legged stool. We're all signing off on this and we're going in together on it.
Yeah, you got to work with the stakeholders. And I think the other part of it is that sometimes the stakeholder will take a step back and look at the procurement person and say, why did you buy 100,000 pounds of mangoes? Yeah. You're right about the selective memory. It is something that it has to be a collaborative partnership with all 3 parties there. Possibly you could bring marketing.
We've got time for one more panel question, and then we're at time.
Okay. The last panel question is going to be for Nedi. In addition to managing suppliers, managing stakeholders, we also have to manage the C-suite. And I'm sure all of you have heard me go off on my rant about CFOs and how they've had all of 1 hour of procurement training and 4 hours of supply chain training during their MBA program, yet they are experts on procurement. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Nedi to talk about his experience. We need to, okay.
All right, great. Thank you, Sabrina. So I love this question because I'm no expert in it. So, but I'm going to try to keep it light since it's the last question as well. And what I'm about to share is more, I don't know if it's a comedy, it's a tragedy, but it's as bad as it gets. And at least I haven't had anything like this in my lifetime since this happened many years ago. I'm going to try to paint a picture of a situation probably some of you have experienced, but I felt like 10 different things were happening all at the same time in a matter of 2 hours. And this was a quarter end a few years back in one of my practitioner roles. I'm the Chief Procurement Officer, and there are 5 stars in this soap opera. So there's me, then there's our CFO, who is a very cost-conscious, true finance executive, a very good one. Then there's our CEO, who has a tendency to essentially do things without getting a lot of feedback from his executive team and say yes to things, and then great executive as well, but just he likes to move fast. Our third player in the star in the soap opera is our CTO, our Chief Technology Officer, who's also a great technology executive. And then finally, the final player is our Chief Revenue Officer, who obviously being on the sales side thinks that he's running the company. And I'm sure you've seen these profiles over your careers many, many times. In this particular quarter end day, we had 3 contracts, among others, that were large enough that needed executive sign off, and 2 of those were in the sales area. So our Chief Revenue Officer managed those 2 relationships. And then the third one was in the technology area and was with our technology officer. Throughout the day, in the early parts of the day, we got the information. By the way, none of our executives technically signed contracts. They all came to procurement after all the approvals were done, et cetera. But we got wind that our Chief Revenue Officer signed contract number 1. And we immediately shot an email saying, look, this just violates procurement policy. Let's make sure that we get all the approvals before we sign contracts. And he's like, sorry, didn't know. Of course, again, I'm sure all of you have heard that before. This is all happening, by the way, on the same exact day. A few hours go by, we're still working on contracts, finalizing the actual deals. And at this point, it's 9 p.m. East Coast. Some of our suppliers were West Coast, but it's 9 p.m. East Coast, and there's some email traffic that starts. Somebody from our Chief Revenue Officer's team escalates. By the way, if you're keeping score, it's Chief Revenue Officer 1, everybody else 0 so far. Somebody on our sales team sends an email to our CEO and CFO. CTO is not in this email chain because it's not in his area. It sends the email to 2 of them, says, I have this contract, procurement's holding it up, we need to get it signed. Our CEO, quick to respond, responds probably within a few minutes, says, spoke to our Chief Revenue Officer, this is good to go, approved, please execute. And he didn't give our Chief Financial Officer, our CFO, even an opportunity to speak up and just approved, even though they were both addressed in that email, obviously. And I'm watching this via email. So far score, Chief Revenue Officer 2, everybody else 0. Now we've got that other contract for our technology team that we're still working on. And our CFO needs to save face in some shape or form. And we were very cost conscious that quarter. So she sends an email and says, hey, our CEO, we have this other contract in technology. Do you think this is something we can delay? And our CEO says, great point. let's delay that contract. So far, our Chief Revenue Officer 2, our CFO 1, CTO 0. And in the meantime, our CTO is unaware of any of this thing is happening. So the next thing that happens, our CEO sends an email to our CTO, copies all of us, and says, we just talked, and I think we're delaying this contract. And this guy was just completely unaware of where this is coming from, how we ended up here. Why is this contract that was being negotiated and about to be signed today all of a sudden is not going to get executed? Somebody needed to save face, and essentially that's what happened. I'm watching this, I'm saying, okay, poor guy had no clue this was gonna happen. So then the question turns to me, and I'm actually texting my team in the meantime. I'm saying, I hope I'm not the one who's gonna be the biggest loser at the end of this night, but somebody's gonna have to get blamed for what's going on here. So eventually that contract doesn't get signed that night. And there's a whole bunch of questions, et cetera. The next morning, obviously, now I need to go back to the supplier and tell them why their contract was not signed. And I said, look, it was just completely out of my hands. We had this corporate politics that was going on. They said, you promised us you were going to get signature by midnight. And I said, I did promise you. I just didn't expect what just unfolded. And then I had some creative ideas as to sort of how we can maybe get our CFO to still say, okay, and still save face. So we actually restructured the contract that morning within a couple hours. I went, then they said, okay, can you not promise this is going to get signed? I said, I can't promise you anything. I have no clue what I'm about to do, but I'm going to first go to our CFO because she was the one who originally rejected this contract. So reached out to our CFO. I said, look, I restructured the deal. I think this is better economics. How does this sound? She says, approved. Then I call our CTO and say, I got your contract approved. He's like, how did you do that? Well, we restructured it. Then I had to get my CFO's buy-in because she was the one who originally rejected it. And then they all said, yeah, but let's go to our CEO and make sure he's okay. So I sent another email, and finally our CEO approved as well. And everybody was eventually happy. But it was insane how to kind of go through it within a matter of a few hours. It actually led into emails that went to probably 1 or 2 a.m. in the morning that pretty much, I think all of that corporate dynamics was not really about the legitimacy of the contract. There was some financial information obviously in there that was important, but I felt both of these deals were strong enough to go forward with. It's just that somebody needed to get a win, and then when they lost, they needed to get a different win. So it was very interesting to see it play out, but at the end, at least it turned out to be okay.
Yeah, I'm glad you're not in that situation anymore, but I'm going to take note and maybe keep a scoreboard by in my notebook so that I can figure out where the problems are going to come next time I have a contract going through. It looks like we do have one question for you if we have time for it. Sarah, Brendan?
Yeah, we can do one question.
Okay.
So Nedi, do you think that that all the efforts of the procurement team is still underestimated by other departments, including the CEO?
It's a great question. I think Sabrina said it perfectly earlier. It really depends on how much procurement background the executive team has. I worked in companies where the actual executive as well as the CEO came from the finance ranks, understood procurement. Not all finance executives do, but he understood procurement and made a big difference. And then there are other situations where all they think is you are an 11th hour haggler. They just want to hand over a contract the day before it needs to get signed and say, why don't you do your magic? And we're like, I'm not really sure you get what we do. We are no magicians and we don't do magic. So the answer is yes and no. I think we always get underestimated by groups that just don't understand procurement. And I don't think, it's not like they don't want to understand. I think they've made their decision as to where they think procurement sits. And then there are other situations where I feel if they've come through the ranks or they've worked closely with procurement in the past, they're very understanding. And if anything, they do understand that a lot of the things just won't get done unless procurement gets to deliver.
All right, thank you, Nedi. And with that, we are going to close out our first virtual procurement talk. I want to give an extra thanks to Nedi. He and the Compass team were going to host our event in person. So speaking about getting out of contracts and canceling events, they were very gracious to offer, and hopefully we'll be able to take them up on the offer later in the year or next year.
I hope so.
Sanjay, sounds like we need to get you a bodyguard. Anna, I think you would be a great motivational speaker. Jonathan, your wife sounds really amazing. I want to meet a volleyball star. Sabrina, thank you so much for moderating our panel. You have great energy and insights. And I also want to thank Tandra. She had to step out. They have a lot going on with the dorms and dealing with getting all the kids out of the university. So she had an emergency come up and had to step out. So thank you all again for joining. This was recorded. We will be sharing this online, so you will be able to get a copy of it. Brandon will also send out a follow-up email. Our next procurement talk is April 23rd at 4 East Coast time. So if you'd like to learn from more experts and engage and network with your industry, we'd love to have you in a couple weeks.
Thanks a lot, Sarah. And thanks to all the panelists. That was a great chat.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.